Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. It started with one reckless offer, $1,000. Pretend to be my wife tonight. The words hung in the air like smoke, bold, unfiltered, and impossible to take back. The small cafe on Fifth Avenue fell silent. Outside, rain painted the New York skyline in shimmering streaks of gold, as thunder rumbled like a warning from the heavens. Ethan Callahan, 33, the powerful CEO of Callahan Enterprises, sat by the window with the kind of calm that came from years of pretending not to care. His tailored suit, his perfect composure, they were his armor. But tonight, even the armor felt heavy. Success had made him wealthy, but it had also made him lonely. In less than 2 hours, he would stand beneath the glittering chandeliers of the St. Regis Hotel, where the city's elite gathered for the annual charity gala. His mother, Elizabeth Callahan, the elegant matriarch of Manhattan society, would be there, ready, as always, to parade a list of suitable women in front of her only son. Ethan had smiled through it for years, but tonight he couldn't do it again. Tonight, he wanted control, even if it meant creating an illusion. He didn't know why he said those words to the quiet waitress wiping down tables, or why her calm brown eyes stopped him mid-breath. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not as a billionaire, but as a man who'd lost his way. The rain kept falling, soft and relentless, as if New York itself was holding its breath. And that was how it began. Not with love at first sight, but with a lie that felt far too real. The rain hadn't stopped that night. It whispered against the cafe windows long after the lights went out, soft and endless, like the city itself was trying to wash away someone's regret. Ethan barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice again, calm, steady, cutting straight through his arrogance. "I'm not someone you can buy." That sentence looped in his mind like a curse, or maybe a challenge. He'd met women who smiled at his wealth, who said yes before he even finished asking. But not her. The waitress with the quiet eyes had walked away without hesitation. It wasn't anger that haunted him now. It was curiosity, and something heavier that he didn't dare name. When dawn broke over Manhattan, the sky was pale and tired. The city came alive beneath it. Horns, sirens, footsteps, the rhythm of people chasing something they might never catch. Ethan sat in his penthouse office, coffee untouched, staring at the skyline. It was everything he'd ever wanted, yet it all felt unbearably empty. By noon, his assistant appeared at the door. "Sir, your mother called again. She wanted to confirm if your wife will be joining the gala tonight." He didn't look up. "Of course she did." The assistant hesitated. "Should I tell her anything?" Ethan's lips curved into something between a smirk and a sigh. "Tell her she'll find out tonight." When the door closed, he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The lie had been small at first, a harmless excuse to end the conversation. But now it had grown teeth. A wife. His mother was expecting one. The city's elite would be expecting one. And the press? They always expected everything. He swore softly under his breath and grabbed his coat. The bell above the cafe door chimed that evening, the familiar jingle slicing through the quiet hum of conversation. Sarah looked up from behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a simple braid, the same calm eyes that had unsettled him the night before. When she saw him, her expression froze. Not out of fear, but out of irritation she was trying hard to hide. "You're back," she said coolly, placing a mug on the counter. "I thought I made myself clear." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "You did, but I'm not here to buy you this time." "Then what are you here for?" He paused, then said quietly, "To ask for a favor." She raised an eyebrow. "From a woman you insulted less than 24 hours ago?" He winced slightly. "Fair point. The cafe was quieter tonight. The smell of espresso and rain mixed in the air." A couple at the corner table laughed softly. Somewhere the espresso machine hissed. Everything felt ordinary, except for the tension between them. "I shouldn't have said what I did yesterday," Ethan said finally. It was rude. You didn't deserve that. Apology accepted, she said quickly, but there was no warmth in her tone. She turned away, reaching for a dish towel, but, he continued, I still need help tonight. That made her stop. She turned back slowly, her eyes narrowing. Help? With what? He hesitated only a second before answering. I need someone to pretend to be my wife. Just for one evening, at a charity event. Nothing inappropriate, nothing complicated. You'll be treated with respect, and compensated fairly. Her laugh was soft but sharp. You really don't quit, do you? Ethan looked at her, dead serious. I'm not joking. You think I'd say yes to that? I think, he said carefully, you're someone who can stand her ground. Someone who won't embarrass herself or me. And someone who doesn't care about money, which makes you perfect for this. The words caught her off guard. For a moment, she didn't reply. His tone wasn't flirtatious, and yet it wasn't purely business either. She crossed her arms. Why me, Mr. Callahan? He exhaled slowly. Because last night, you were the only person who looked at me like a man, not a brand. The silence stretched between them, heavy with something neither of them understood. Sarah had spent 3 years rebuilding herself from the ashes of a life destroyed, a career stolen, a heart broken. Trust didn't come easily anymore. And yet, as she looked at him, she saw a trace of something painfully familiar. Loneliness dressed in arrogance. This is crazy, she murmured. Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. Most things worth doing are. For a long moment, she didn't move. The clock ticked. The city outside glowed orange with the setting sun. Finally, Sarah untied her apron and laid it neatly on the counter. 3 conditions, she said. Ethan straightened, almost afraid to breathe. I'm listening. 1, you don't ask about my past. 2, this ends tonight, no exceptions. And 3, I get half the payment up front. He blinked, then let out a short laugh. You drive a hard bargain, she didn't smile. Take it or leave it, he extended his hand. Deal. Her fingers brushed his, cool, firm, and reluctant. But the moment they touched, something shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the click of a lock opening somewhere deep inside them both. When they stepped outside, the storm had finally passed. The streets of Manhattan shimmered beneath the glow of streetlights, puddles reflecting the skyline like broken mirrors. Ethan opened the car door for her, and she hesitated for a second before sliding in. You might regret this, he said quietly as he settled beside her. Sarah turned her head, her gaze steady. I already do, he laughed, a soft, genuine sound, surprising even to himself. For the first time in a long while, the weight on his chest didn't feel so heavy. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake, that single reckless decision, had just rewritten both their lives. The next morning, New York looked softer, gentler, the kind of calm that comes after a storm, when the city seems to hold its breath before chaos begins again. But inside the Callahan penthouse, calm was the one thing Ethan didn't have. He'd been up since dawn, pacing between his desk and the window, his mind replaying the same conversation over and over. Her voice lingered in his head. I'm not someone you can buy. He had heard no before, from investors, from rivals, from life itself. But somehow her no was different. It wasn't rejection, it was principle, and that made it sting far more than pride ever could. By mid-morning, his mother arrived unannounced. Elizabeth Callahan, elegant and sharp as ever, stepped into his office with the presence of someone who had long stopped asking for permission. You look tired, she said, removing her gloves and sitting opposite him. Late night? Work? Ethan lied smoothly. Elizabeth gave a knowing smile. Work. Right. You've been saying that for the last 5 years. Tell me, Ethan, when exactly do you plan to have a life outside of those glass walls? He sighed. Mother, I'm serious, she interrupted. Tonight's gala isn't just another social event. The governor will be there, the press, and half the board of your company. It's time people see you're more than a businessman. You need someone beside you. Someone real. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Someone real or someone suitable? Her lips curved, elegant and unbothered. Preferably both, he chuckled dryly. And if I don't? Elizabeth's expression softened, the steel in her tone briefly melting into something that almost sounded like concern. Then I'll introduce you myself. He stared at her, and for the first time in years felt genuinely cornered. There was no way out, except one. That afternoon, the bell above the cafe door jingled again. Sarah glanced up, expecting another customer on their lunch break, and froze when she saw him. Ethan Callahan, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine cover. But what shocked her wasn't the man. It was the woman standing beside him. Good afternoon, Elizabeth greeted warmly. Are you the young lady my son has told me about? Sarah blinked. I'm sorry, what? Ethan cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Mother, maybe let me handle this. Elizabeth arched a brow, but stepped aside gracefully, her heels clicking as she moved toward the window. Sarah folded her arms. You told your mother about me? He sighed. Not exactly. She might have gotten the wrong impression. Her eyes narrowed. About what? Ethan hesitated, then said it plainly. That you're my wife. For a moment, the only sound in the cafe was the low hum of the coffee machine. Sarah stared at him, her face unreadable. You told your mother I'm your wife? Not intentionally, he said quickly. It was a misunderstanding. I needed her to stop trying to set me up with someone else. I didn't think she'd show up here. She finished for him deadpan, he exhaled. Exactly. Elizabeth turned back toward them, graceful as ever. So, you are married, she said with a smile that could slice through glass. I must say, Ethan, you have good taste. She's lovely. Sarah blinked, stunned. I think there's been some confusion. Ethan stepped in, voice steady. There's no confusion, Mother. Sarah and we've just kept things private. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily it almost frightened him. Elizabeth's face lit up with genuine delight. Oh, darling, I'm so relieved. I knew there was someone special. She turned to Sarah. You must join us tonight, dear. The gala wouldn't be complete without you. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Ethan gave her a look. Pleading. Desperate. Almost human. Elizabeth smiled and excused herself to take a call, leaving them a few precious seconds of silence. Sarah glared at him. You lied to your mother. About me. Yes, he admitted. And now I'm asking you to help me keep that lie for one night. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Unbelievable. I know how it sounds, he said, lowering his voice. But please, I'm not asking for money or favors. I'm asking because I'm out of options. My mother means well, but she's relentless. If you help me tonight, it ends there. No one gets hurt. He paused, eyes locking onto hers. Not for money, for peace. Just for one night. Sarah stared at him, torn between disbelief and reluctant empathy. He looked nothing like the arrogant man from the night before. This version of Ethan seemed lost, vulnerable even. Finally, she said quietly, You're really desperate, aren't you? He gave a faint, humorless smile. Desperation is an understatement. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah reached up, unfastened her apron, and set it aside. 3 conditions, she said, her tone firm but calm. Ethan straightened slightly, like a soldier waiting for orders. I'm listening. 1, you don't ask about my past. 2, this ends after tonight. And 3, I get half the payment up front. He nodded without hesitation. Done, her brows lifted. That fast? He smiled faintly. You don't waste time, Ms. Mitchell. Neither do I. He reached into his coat, slid an envelope across the counter. Crisp bills neatly folded. She didn't touch it right away, just looked at him, as if weighing the cost of stepping into someone else's lie. Finally, she took it. Fine, but if this goes wrong, I walk away. No explanations. Understood. He extended his hand. She hesitated, then shook it, her palm cool against his, the handshake firm but brief. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Elizabeth returned, her smile glowing. Wonderful. I'll send a car for you at 7, my dear. Sarah blinked. A car? Ethan interjected smoothly. I'll handle that, Mother. As his mother left, Sarah turned back to him, voice low. You owe me for this, he nodded. I know. When he finally stepped out of the cafe, The city lights were just starting to bloom across the skyline. The evening wind was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and something new. Anticipation, maybe. Inside, Sarah watched him disappear down the street, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She didn't believe in fate, but somehow she had the strange feeling that tonight, fate believed in her. Neither of them could have guessed it yet, that one night, one lie, would soon unravel everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and themselves. The city glittered that evening as if it knew a secret. Manhattan's skyline shimmered beneath the fading sunset, a canvas of gold and blue reflecting off mirrored glass towers. Down below, the world was moving faster, cars honking, people rushing, lives colliding. But inside a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, time stood still. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, frozen. On her bed lay a dress, a long, elegant gown of midnight blue satin, folded neatly inside a white box with a note resting on top. For tonight. No expectations, just gratitude. E? She stared at it for a long time, before finally touching the fabric. It was soft, almost unreal beneath her fingers. Unbelievable, she whispered to herself. A billionaire who thinks sending a dress fixes everything. But still, she held it up against her frame. It was beautiful, simple but sophisticated, the kind of dress that made you feel seen. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder what it would be like to belong in his world, to stand beside him under crystal chandeliers. Even if it was all just pretend. When the car arrived, she almost didn't get in. The sleek black Bentley gleamed under the streetlights, its driver holding the door open with quiet patience. As she slid into the back seat, the city lights blurred into ribbons of gold outside the window. Her heartbeat was steady, but her hands trembled in her lap. Just one night, she reminded herself. Then it's over. At the same time, inside the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, the annual charity gala was already in motion. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork through crowds of the city's most powerful. Politicians, CEOs, socialites dressed in diamonds and ambition. Ethan stood near the entrance, his posture immaculate, his expression unreadable. He'd been trained to perform, to smile, to shake hands, to make deals behind champagne glasses. But tonight, he wasn't here as the CEO. Tonight he was here as a man who had lied to his mother, and dragged a stranger into that lie. Ethan, his mother's voice called warmly. "Darling, where is your wife? You did bring her, didn't you?" He straightened his tie, masking the flicker of anxiety in his chest. "She'll be here any minute, Mother." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled. "I can't wait to meet her properly." Neither could he, though not for the same reason. When Sarah entered, the room seemed to pause for a single breath. She walked through the doorway slowly, her dark hair pinned up in soft curls, the blue satin of her gown catching the light like ocean waves. The necklace she wore, delicate silver, borrowed from a friend, rested lightly against her collarbone. There was no arrogance in her stride, only quiet confidence, and somehow that made her stand out even more. Ethan turned just in time to see her. For a moment he forgot where he was. The noise of the room faded. The lights dimmed in his mind until all he saw was her. "Sarah," he murmured, almost to himself. She smiled faintly. "Do I pass for your wife yet?" He couldn't help it. He smiled. "You look perfect. Careful," she teased softly. That almost sounded real. "Maybe it is," he replied, before he could stop himself. Elizabeth approached with open arms, eyes warm and approving. "You must be Sarah. Ethan's told me so much about you." Sarah froze, then smiled politely. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Callahan." "Oh, please, Elizabeth." "And might I say, you're even lovelier than I imagined." Ethan exhaled quietly, grateful. For the first time that night, something felt right, almost peaceful. Until a voice from behind sliced through that peace like a blade. Well, Ethan Callahan. Still making grand entrances, I see. He turned sharply. Victoria Hale. The name alone was enough to make his shoulders tense. She stood there, every inch the socialite she'd always been. Stunning, self-assured, and dangerous. Her red gown glittered like fire under the chandeliers. Victoria, Ethan said evenly. Didn't realize you were in town. I wasn't, she replied smoothly, her eyes sliding toward Sarah. But I heard you were finally settling down. Thought I'd see it for myself. Sarah extended a polite hand. Sarah Mitchell. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, the mystery wife. I must admit, Ethan, you've surprised me. She's different from your usual type. Different's good, Ethan said, tone sharp enough to draw blood. But Victoria wasn't done. Oh, I agree. Still, you know what they say. When something looks too perfect, it usually is. The air between them turned heavy. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to smile. Funny. I've heard the same thing about diamonds. Victoria blinked, caught off guard. Then laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Touché. Elizabeth, oblivious to the tension, clapped her hands together. Now, let's all enjoy the evening. It's for charity, not dueling. Hours passed in a blur of laughter, music, and whispered conversations. But beneath the glamour, tension simmered. Sarah felt the weight of every stare, every whispered speculation. She could hear the gossip ripple behind her like wind through silk. Who is she? Where did he find her? She doesn't look like one of us. Still, she held her head high. Ethan stayed close, guiding her through the room, his hand occasionally brushing hers. Protective, reassuring, dangerously warm. At one point, as they paused by the terrace overlooking the city, Sarah exhaled. You didn't tell me it would feel like walking through fire. He smiled faintly. You're handling it better than most. She looked at him, half amused, half curious. And how do you usually handle it? He met her gaze, by pretending it doesn't burn. Their eyes locked, a long charged silence stretching between them. The orchestra inside shifted to a slower melody, soft and haunting. For a moment, the city disappeared, leaving only two people standing too close, pretending too much. The spell broke when Victoria appeared again, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Careful, darling, she said sweetly, handing one to Sarah. You might start to believe this is real. Sarah met her gaze evenly. Maybe pretending isn't so bad. At least we get to choose what part of the truth we keep. Victoria's smile faltered. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. Enough, Victoria, she smirked. Of course, wouldn't want to upset the happy couple. When she left, Sarah looked down at her glass, her hand trembling slightly. She's in love with you. Was, Ethan said quietly. A long time ago. Sarah hesitated, then looked up. And you? He turned toward her, eyes dark and unreadable. I don't live in the past. For the first time, she saw something raw flicker behind his calm. Loneliness, regret, maybe even longing. And in that instant, something inside her softened. Later that night, as they left the ballroom, Ethan opened the car door for her. She hesitated, glancing back at the glittering lights of the hotel. You handled yourself well tonight, he said. She smiled faintly. You mean I survived the circus? More than survived, he murmured. You made them believe. She looked at him then, really looked. And what about you? Did you believe it too? Ethan didn't answer right away. He just met her gaze, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. Maybe, he said softly. For a moment. The door closed with a quiet click, sealing the unspoken between them. Outside, the city gleamed, alive, restless, infinite. Inside the car, neither of them spoke. But for the first time since their deal began, silence didn't feel empty. It felt dangerous, because somewhere between the lie and the longing, something real had begun. The night had quieted. The laughter, the music, the polite chatter of the gala, all of it faded into a distant hum behind closed glass doors. The city stretched below the terrace like a sea of lights, pulsing and alive, but up here, it was strangely still. Ethan leaned against the marble railing, his tie slightly loosened, the mask of the perfect CEO finally slipping away. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and roses from the garden below. For the first time in years, He looked less like a man in control, and more like someone trying to remember how to breathe. Sarah joined him silently. Her heels clicked softly on the stone before she stopped beside him, leaving just enough distance to be polite. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was fragile, like glass, as if both were afraid that words might shatter it. Finally, she broke it. "You look like someone trying to escape a life everyone else envies." He let out a quiet laugh, low and bitter. "Maybe that's exactly what I am." Sarah turned slightly, studying him. The golden light from inside brushed against his face, softening the edges that success had carved too sharply. "Why?" she asked gently. He took a long breath before answering. "Because envy doesn't come with understanding. People see money, power, luxury, but they don't see what it costs." Her voice lowered. "And what did it cost you, Ethan?" He looked at her then, his eyes distant, his tone steady but heavy. "Trust." The word hung in the air. "I was engaged once," he said quietly, "to someone I thought I'd spend my life with. Victoria wasn't always like that. When we met, she was ambitious, sharp, unstoppable. I admired that. I thought we were a team." He smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Turns out we were, just not on the same side." Sarah didn't interrupt. She could see how hard it was for him to say this. "She used me," he continued. "Fed confidential information to one of my competitors in exchange for her own promotion. When I found out, I tried to protect her. I took the blame publicly. The board nearly forced me out of my own company." He stared down at the city lights, his voice quieter now. "I forgave her. I shouldn't have. She left the next week anyway." Silence again. Only the faint echo of music from the ballroom filtered through the glass doors. Sarah's chest tightened. She had seen heartbreak before, felt it, lived it. But there was something raw about hearing it from him. For once, the polished billionaire facade was gone, and what remained was a man who'd been broken in private. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He looked at her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Don't be. It's old history. I should have known better." Her eyes darkened. "Knowing better doesn't always protect you." He caught the shift in her tone immediately. "What about you?" he asked gently. "What did it cost you?" Sarah hesitated. For a moment she thought about lying. It would be easier to stay guarded, but something in his eyes, something honest, disarmed her. "I used to be a lawyer," she began slowly. "Not long ago, actually. I worked at a corporate firm, big, competitive, the kind of place that eats people alive if you hesitate." Ethan turned to face her fully, listening. "I was engaged too," she continued. "His name was David Chen. Brilliant, charming, everything I thought I wanted. He promised me the world, and I believed him." Her throat tightened, but she kept going. "One day, a major case went wrong. A file was leaked, confidential evidence. The firm blamed me. I didn't know why until I found out it was David who had sold the documents for money and prestige. He framed me to cover his tracks, and when I tried to fight back, no one listened." Ethan's expression hardened, his jaw tense. "He destroyed your career," she nodded slowly. "He destroyed everything. My reputation, my license, my name. I lost it all overnight. The firm fired me, the bar suspended me, and he walked away without a scratch." She tried to smile, but it came out broken. "So I did what anyone does when their world ends. I started over. Waitressing isn't glamorous, but it's honest. At least no one can take that from me." For a long time, neither spoke. The city lights flickered below them like a heartbeat. Ethan finally said quietly, "He's a coward." Sarah gave a small, sad laugh. "Cowards have power too, especially when they hide behind charm." Their eyes met again, and this time, there was no pretense. Just two people recognizing the same kind of damage in each other. "I guess we both learned the same lesson," Ethan said softly. "What's that?" she asked. "That trust is the most expensive thing in the world," he said. "And once you lose it, you never get it back for free." The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, blinking fast, but he noticed. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice steady but warm. "You didn't deserve what happened to you." She looked down at their joined hands, her pulse racing. Neither did you. Something shifted in the air between them, gentle but electric. For the first time all evening, she didn't want to pull away. He took a half step closer. Maybe this whole thing was never about pretending, he said quietly. She met his gaze. The city lights danced in his eyes, and suddenly, everything else fell away. Then, she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she meant to say next. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. She didn't. The first kiss wasn't perfect. It wasn't practiced or planned. It was hesitant, fragile, and real. The kind of kiss that tasted like truth after too many lies. For a fleeting moment, the world felt right, until a sharp voice shattered it. Well, someone said behind them, mock amusement dripping from every syllable. This is unexpected. Sarah froze. That voice, smooth, confident, poisonous. She turned. David Chen stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, a smirk curling on his lips. His eyes gleamed with recognition and something darker. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "It's been a long time," her breath caught. Ethan's hand tightened around hers instinctively. The past she had tried to bury had just walked back into her life, dressed in a tuxedo and smiling like the devil. The kiss should have been the beginning of something beautiful, but fate had other plans. When Sarah turned and saw David Chen, the air vanished from her lungs. His smirk was the same, cold, practiced, venomous. He looked exactly as he had the last time she saw him, standing over her as her world collapsed. "Hello, Sarah," he said smoothly, hands tucked into his pockets like he owned the night. "I didn't expect to find you here, especially not like this." Ethan's body stiffened. "You know him?" Her voice trembled. "I did. Once." David's gaze flicked toward Ethan, a cruel smile curling on his lips. "Of course she didn't tell you. She's good at hiding things. It's practically her talent." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed calm. "Maybe you should walk away before you regret staying," David chuckled, tilting his head. "Protective, aren't you? That's cute. But trust me, you don't know who you're protecting." He turned back to Sarah, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate and dangerous. "It's funny. You always had a way of landing on your feet, even after you destroyed everything around you. Guess some people never change." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. "You're the one who destroyed everything," she whispered. He smirked. "Details." Then, with a glance toward the ballroom, he added casually, "Don't worry. I won't tell your little secret. Not yet." And with that, he walked away, leaving behind a silence that burned. Ethan turned toward her, his eyes searching her face. What did he mean? But Sarah couldn't answer. She couldn't even breathe. The ghosts she had buried were clawing their way back to the surface. I need a minute," she whispered. And before he could stop her, she slipped back inside. Inside, the gala had reached its peak. Music swelled, laughter floated, champagne glasses clinked. But to Sarah, everything felt distorted. Too loud, too bright, too fake. She walked toward the powder room, needing air, needing time. What she didn't see was Victoria Hale, watching her from across the room, eyes cold and calculating. Victoria had seen the kiss. Every second of it, and when David Chen approached her earlier, whispering poison into her ear, she had listened. Now, she had a plan. Minutes later, Sarah stepped out of the restroom, trying to steady herself. But before she could take another step, someone stumbled into her, Victoria clutching her arm dramatically. "Watch where you're going," Victoria snapped, loud enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. "I didn't," Sarah began, but Victoria's voice rose higher, dripping with outrage. "She pushed me!" The small crowd gasped. Someone whispered her name. Cameras flashed, and in that instant, Sarah realized it wasn't an accident. It was a trap. "No, I didn't touch her," Sarah said firmly, trying to stay calm. "She walked straight into me," but Victoria's eyes glistened with fake tears. "You think you can get away with everything, don't you? Pretending to be someone you're not." The murmur in the room grew louder. People were watching now. circling like sharks sensing blood. Ethan, hearing the commotion, pushed his way through the crowd. "What's going on?" Victoria straightened, the picture of righteous anger. "What's going on?" she said sharply. "Is that your little wife just attacked me?" Ethan's tone was cold steel. "That's ridiculous." "Oh, really?" Victoria sneered. "Because I happen to know she's not who she says she is." And with that, she turned toward the audience, her voice rising. "Everyone should know the truth. She's not Ethan's wife at all. She's a waitress from some hole-in-the-wall cafe downtown." The room exploded into whispers. Faces turned toward Sarah. Shock, judgment, disgust. Sarah's lips parted, but no words came out. Then another voice joined the chaos. Darker, smoother, David Chen. He stepped forward slowly, the predator savoring his moment. "Actually," he said, "Victoria's right. And that's not even the best part." He smiled, the kind of smile that promised destruction. "You see, what she didn't tell you is that Sarah Mitchell used to be a lawyer. A good one, too, until she got her license revoked for fraud." Gasps echoed around the ballroom. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "Fraud?" "That's a lie," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "You know it's a lie." David spread his hands innocently. "Oh, I'm sure it's all one big misunderstanding. But the Bar Association doesn't revoke someone's license without a reason, do they?" Ethan stepped forward, fury flashing in his eyes. "You need to leave, now," David smirked. "You sure you want to defend her, Ethan? Because when this story hits the press tomorrow, it won't be her name that suffers. It'll be yours." Victoria added sweetly. "Poor Ethan. Fooled by a waitress with a record. You always had a soft spot for strays." The words hit like a blade. Sarah's vision blurred. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She tried to speak, but the sound barely came out. Every face in the room looked at her. Judging, whispering, doubting. She wanted to disappear, but before she could move, Ethan's voice cut through the noise like thunder. "Enough." The entire ballroom fell silent. He stepped forward, standing between Sarah and the crowd, his shoulders squared, his expression calm but fierce. "You all want the truth?" he said, his voice steady. "Here it is." He turned to face them fully. "Yes, Sarah isn't my wife. That part is true." Murmurs spread like fire. Victoria's lips curled in satisfaction, until he continued. "But everything else you said," he went on, "is a lie." He looked directly at David. "You talk about fraud, David? The only fraud here is you, a man who ruins others for sport." David's smirk faltered. Ethan turned toward Victoria next. "And you, still so desperate for attention, you'd stage a scene just to feel relevant." Her face went pale. Then he looked back at Sarah, his tone softening, but his words echoing through the hall. "She might not be my wife, but she's the most honest, most courageous person I've ever met." He took her hand, his voice unshaking. "And if you want the truth, then here it is." He paused, his eyes locking on hers. "I love her." The words hung in the air, raw and powerful. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the music had stopped. Elizabeth Callahan, standing near the back, brought a hand to her chest. In her eyes was not anger, but understanding. Sarah stood frozen, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Ethan," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to say anything," but she did. "You shouldn't have to protect me." He smiled faintly. Too late for that. Around them, the silence deepened, not disbelief, but awe. Because for the first time that night, there was something real inside those glittering walls. Truth and love. The kind that didn't need pretending anymore. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos. Headlines screamed from every newsstand across Manhattan. CEO Ethan Callahan defends mystery waitress at gala. Love scandal or corporate cover-up? Who is Sarah Mitchell? The internet devoured it. Social media buzzed with speculation and judgment. Videos of the gala confrontation spreading like wildfire. The kiss, the declaration, the humiliation. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were kind. Inside the Callahan Enterprises tower, reporters camped outside the entrance, cameras flashing as Ethan's car pulled up. The moment he stepped out, questions erupted like gunfire. "Mr. Callahan, is she really just a waitress? Are you in a relationship with Sarah Mitchell? Did she manipulate you for money?" He didn't answer a single one. His face remained unreadable as he strode through the glass doors, calm on the surface, though a storm churned beneath. Upstairs, Sarah sat quietly in his office, her hair pulled back, hands folded in her lap. She looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from being hunted by headlines. Ethan closed the door behind him, shutting out the chaos. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently. She looked up at him, her voice steady but soft. "If I'm not here, people will think I'm hiding." He hesitated, then nodded. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." "I know," she replied. "But I owe myself one." There was silence. Heavy, honest silence. Then she picked up a tablet on the desk and turned it toward him. "Victoria's already started her campaign," she said. On the screen were articles, fake interviews, doctored photos, all painting Sarah as a con artist who targeted Ethan for his wealth. "David's fingerprints are all over this too," she continued. "He's the one feeding the tabloids." Ethan frowned, scanning the data. "He wants to damage my company's stock. If investors start doubting my credibility, it'll open room for his firm to move in." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. And Victoria benefits by destroying you personally. She's always cared more about revenge than business." He looked at her, surprised. "You figured this out overnight?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "Once a lawyer, always a lawyer. I can still recognize a setup when I see one." Ethan leaned back, exhaling. "So what do we do?" Her eyes hardened. "We fight back." They spent the next several hours side by side, her laptop open, his phone buzzing nonstop with calls he ignored. The air was tense but focused. Sarah moved with quiet precision, tracing the origins of articles, following data trails, connecting anonymous accounts to known PR firms. "Here," she said, tapping the screen. "This one's linked to a shell company that Victoria used for image management back when she was your fiancé." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Of course. And this," she continued, "is worse. The source of the financial leaks. It's coming from inside Callahan Tech." He straightened. "Someone on the board," she nodded grimly. "My bet's on one of the junior executives David used to work with. He probably bribed them." He rubbed his temples. "This is a full-scale takedown." Sarah looked at him, eyes sharp. "Then we treat it like one." He met her gaze. "You realize this means going public, putting yourself back under fire." "I already am," she said simply. "But if I can help expose them, it'll be worth it." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You really have no fear, do you?" "I do," she said softly. "But I'm tired of running from it." That night, his penthouse became their war room. Screens flickered with emails, financial records, data graphs. Papers covered the table. At one point, Ethan glanced up from his laptop and saw her, barefoot, hair falling loosely, typing furiously. She looked nothing like the woman from the gala. And yet, she'd never looked stronger. "Remind me again," he said with a faint smile, "why I ever thought you needed protecting." She smirked without looking up. "Because you underestimate me." "I'm starting to see that," he said quietly. For a while, the only sound was the clicking of keys and the faint hum of the city outside. Then Sarah froze. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at this." She turned her screen toward him. On it was a chain of encrypted emails between David Chen and one of Callahan Tech's board members. Attached were internal documents, pricing strategies, and confidential R&D reports. "He's been leaking company data for weeks," she said, scrolling. "And Victoria's been using her father's influence in the press to frame you as the leak." Ethan's expression darkened. "Her father, the owner of Hale Media Group," Sarah nodded. "That's why the story spread so fast. They control half the outlets covering it." He clenched his fists. "So they use the media to discredit me, tank my company's stock, and step in to buy shares at a discount." "Classic hostile takeover," she exhaled. "And I bet David's firm is already positioned to do it." Ethan's jaw hardened. "Not if I get there first." By midnight, They had gathered enough evidence to piece together the scheme. Sarah crafted a full legal brief, dates, transfers, correspondences, everything. Her precision impressed even Ethan. "You sure you don't want your law license back?" He joked lightly. She smiled faintly. "Who says I don't?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You could rebuild your career, you know. You're too good to be forgotten." Her expression softened. "Maybe. But right now, I care more about rebuilding my life." He wanted to say something that crossed the line between gratitude and something deeper. But before he could, her phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message. A single line. "You should have stayed quiet, Sarah." Her blood ran cold. She showed it to him. Ethan's face darkened instantly. "They know we're on to them." He took her phone, forwarding the message to his security chief. "You're not going anywhere alone. Not until this is over." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't control, and it was fear. Real fear. 2 days later, the plan was ready. Sarah would leak their story, the truth, using the same press channels Victoria had exploited. Ethan would call a shareholders' meeting to expose the internal betrayal publicly, backed by digital evidence Sarah had compiled. "Are you ready?" he asked, standing beside her as the city lights glowed beneath their feet. She nodded, though her heart pounded. "Ready," he gave her a small, proud smile. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" Her voice was steady. "No, just finally done being the victim." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're not alone in this." Not anymore. For a moment, they simply stood there, partners, allies, something more than both. "Let's finish this," she said, and as they turned back toward the glow of their screens, one truth became clear. They had been brought together by a lie, but now united by justice, they were unstoppable. The plan had been set in motion. There was no turning back. 3 nights after the world learned about the Callahan scandal, the city was still buzzing. News anchors speculated, pundits argued, and the headlines shifted by the hour. But behind the noise, in a quiet penthouse overlooking the Hudson, 2 people were preparing for something far greater than a press war. Sarah stood by the window, watching the skyline blur through the mist. Her reflection stared back, calm, collected, but beneath the surface her heart raced. For 3 years, she had lived with the weight of a lie. Tonight, that ended. Ethan entered the room, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked composed as always, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of tension. "You don't have to do this yourself," he said. "I do," she replied firmly. "It started with me. It needs to end with me." He hesitated, then nodded. "Just remember you're not alone this time." She gave him a faint smile. That's what makes it different. By dawn, they were outside Morrison and Associates, the glass and steel fortress where Sarah's career had once begun and ended in the same cruel breath. The lobby hadn't changed. Marble floors, silent security guards, the faint hum of ambition in the air. But this time she wasn't walking in as an employee. She was walking in as the storm. Ethan walked beside her, his presence grounding her with quiet strength. "Are you sure David will be here today?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "He never misses a Monday meeting. It's the one place he feels untouchable." Ethan's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then let's remind him no one is untouchable." They rode the elevator in silence. With each floor, Sarah's pulse quickened. The memories came flooding back. The whispers, the humiliation, the moment her badge was deactivated and her colleagues looked away. When the elevator chimed, she took a deep breath and stepped out. The law firm buzzed with quiet activity. Sleek desks, expensive suits, the faint scent of espresso and fear. "Sarah?" A young paralegal stammered, nearly dropping a stack of files. I thought," she smiled faintly. "I know, so did I." Ethan leaned close. "Where's his office?" She pointed down the hall. "Top floor. Corner office." He always liked to look down on people. They moved quickly, keeping their heads low. In her hand, Sarah carried a small flash drive, the key to exposing everything. Somewhere in this building, David had stored the original records of his deal with Victoria's father, the proof of his betrayal. They reached the glass door of his office. Sarah hesitated only a second before swiping a universal keycard Ethan's security team had provided. The lock clicked. Inside, the office was immaculate. Every object in perfect order, every file neatly labeled. But she knew where to look. Behind the bookshelf, hidden in a false panel, was a digital vault, a private storage drive David used for off-record transactions. She knelt beside it, typing quickly. "I can bypass the encryption," she murmured, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Ethan stood near the door, scanning the hallway. "You've done this before," she smirked. "You'd be surprised what a disgraced lawyer learns when she has nothing left to lose." The file cracked open. Lines of data filled the screen, contracts, financial statements, and a series of incriminating emails. Sarah's eyes widened. "It's all here. Payments from Hale Media Group, signed under David's name. Transfers to offshore accounts. Even the falsified evidence against me." Ethan's voice was low but fierce. "Then let's take it all." He pulled out his phone, connecting it to the drive to copy the files. But just as the progress bar reached 80%, a voice cut through the silence. "Well, isn't this nostalgic?" They froze. David Chen stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, his smile razor sharp. 2 security guards flanked him. "Breaking and entering, Sarah? How very poetic," he said, stepping closer. "You just couldn't stay gone, could you?" Sarah rose slowly, meeting his gaze. "You framed me, David. You ruined my life," he shrugged. "Correction, I saved mine." "You were collateral damage." Ethan stepped forward, his voice cold. "You've made a career out of destroying people." "But tonight that ends," David laughed. "You think you're the hero, Callahan? You're just as naive as she is. You're both standing in my office, stealing my property. You really think anyone will believe your version?" He turned to his guards. "Call the police." But before they could move, Ethan spoke calmly. "No need, they're already on their way." David frowned. "What?" And then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Dozens of them. Moments later, a team of agents stormed in, flashing badges. "FBI, step away from the computers." David's smug smile vanished. "What the hell is this?" Ethan crossed his arms, voice steady as steel. "You've been under investigation for weeks. Every transaction, every email, every word you thought you deleted. We have it all." One of the agents handed David a warrant. "David Chen, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice." David's face went pale. "This is insane." "You have no proof." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes burning with restrained fury. "Actually, we have your confession." Ethan pulled out a small recording device from his pocket, pressing play. David's voice echoed through the room, a perfect recording from their earlier encounter at the Gala Terrace. "She destroyed everything?" "Details. She walked away and I didn't even flinch. I did what I had to do." The sound was clear, undeniable. David's body tensed as agents closed in. "You set me up." Ethan's gaze was unflinching. "No, you set yourself up. I just let you talk." As David was handcuffed, another group of agents entered, holding warrants for Victoria Hale and her father. Their crimes, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and financial fraud, were listed in detail. Victoria's father tried to protest, shouting about influence and connections, but no one listened. The cameras were already rolling. Sarah stood there, watching as the people who had stolen her life were finally dragged away. It felt unreal, like watching a movie she'd seen too many times but never got to finish. When the last agent left, Ethan turned to her quietly. "It's over," she exhaled shakily, her knees almost giving out. He caught her before she could fall. "Hey," he whispered. "It's okay. It's done." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Silent, uncontrollable. 3 years, she said softly. 3 years of being called a liar. And now they know the truth, he finished gently. A week later, the news broke. Sarah Mitchell exonerated after 3-year ordeal. Corruption scandal rocks legal world. David Chen, Victoria Hale, and media mogul father arrested. Callahan Tech CEO applauded for assisting federal investigation. The storm that had once tried to destroy them now cleared the way for redemption. In the quiet of Ethan's office, Sarah placed her reinstatement letter on his desk. The bar had restored her license. Her eyes shimmered with pride and disbelief. He smiled softly. "I told you they couldn't take your truth." She looked at him, a single tear slipping down her cheek, this time from relief. "No, Ethan, you helped me find it again." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "So what now, counselor?" She smiled, the first real, unguarded smile in years. "Now, we start over. This time, together." Outside, the city hummed, alive, bright, and endless. For once, Sarah didn't fear the noise, because this time, she wasn't running from her past. She was walking toward her future, hand in hand with the man who believed in her when no one else did. The storm had finally passed. Weeks after the arrests, the city's headlines told a different kind of story, not one of scandal or betrayal, but of justice and redemption. CEO protects woman he loves from corporate conspiracy. The Callahan scandal exposes New York's biggest fraud ring, and the one that made Sarah smile the most. Disgraced lawyer vindicated. Truth triumphs at last. The world that had once turned its back on her now wanted her story. But Sarah wasn't interested in fame. For the first time in years, she didn't want to fight the noise. She just wanted peace. Ethan's company, Callahan Tech, was rebuilding too. The board had voted unanimously to keep him as CEO, praising his integrity for cooperating with the FBI. But Ethan didn't want to return to business as usual. He called for a complete audit, dissolving partnerships that had thrived on greed and deceit. "No more shortcuts," he said during a company meeting. "No more gray areas. From this moment forward, we build with honesty, even if it's slower." The employees had erupted in applause. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about purpose. Meanwhile, Sarah's reinstatement as a lawyer became official. The letter had arrived on a crisp Monday morning, embossed with the seal of the New York State Bar Association. When she unfolded it, her hands trembled slightly. She read it twice before whispering, "It's really over." Ethan had smiled when she told him. "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning." But instead of returning to her old world of corporate law, Sarah chose a smaller path, one she could call her own. She opened a modest office in Brooklyn, representing victims of wrongful accusations and workplace injustice. "I know what it feels like," she explained to Ethan when he asked why. "To be silenced, to be powerless. I want to give people their voices back." He looked at her with admiration that bordered on reverence. "You already have." Their relationship, once built on pretense, had become something unshakable. They no longer needed words to prove what they felt. It was there in every glance, every shared silence, every morning coffee and late-night talk. Ethan would often stop by her office after work, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, carrying takeout from her favorite diner. "You're supposed to be resting," she'd tease. "I'll rest when you do," he'd reply with that soft, knowing smile, and she would smile back, because she finally believed it, believed in him, in them, in the fragile, beautiful idea of forever. One evening, months later, Ethan called her and asked her to meet him for dinner. "Bruno's Bistro," he said. She laughed in surprise. "You mean the place where you offered me $1,000 to be your fake wife?" "Exactly," he said, his tone playful but warm. "I thought we could rewrite that memory." When Sarah walked in that night, the cafe was quiet. The same rain that had fallen on the night they met now tapped gently against the windows. The lights were dim, the smell of espresso lingering in the air. Familiar, comforting. Ethan was waiting at their old table, dressed simply, without the armor of a CEO. When he saw her, his smile softened. "Déjà vu?" he asked. "Almost," she said, sitting down. "Except this time, I'm not just a waitress, and you're not just a stranger with a ridiculous offer." He chuckled. "You thought it was ridiculous?" "I thought you were insane," she said with a grin. "Well," he said quietly, reaching into his pocket, "maybe I still am." He stood up then, walked around the table and dropped to one knee. For a second, the world seemed to stop. "Sarah Mitchell," he began, voice steady but filled with emotion. "3 years ago, you lost everything because someone took away your truth, but you fought for it. And in doing so, you reminded me what integrity really means." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her skin. "You walked into my life pretending to be my wife, and somehow you became the reason I believe in love again. So now I'm asking you, no pretending this time, will you marry me?" Sarah covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "You really couldn't resist making this dramatic, could you?" He smiled, eyes glinting. "I learned from the best." She laughed through her tears, then nodded. "Yes, Ethan. Of course, yes." The cafe erupted in quiet applause, the staff and a few customers who had witnessed everything smiling warmly. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and as he rose, she pulled him close. Their kiss wasn't born of desperation or fear this time. It was gentle, grounded, full of promise. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft, rhythmic, alive. Later, as they left the cafe hand in hand, Sarah glanced back one last time. The neon sign of Bruno's Bistro glowed faintly against the wet glass, just as it had on the night everything began. Funny, she thought. How something that started as a lie had led them both to the most honest moment of their lives. Ethan squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" She smiled. "That sometimes the best stories start with the worst mistakes." He laughed softly. "Then ours must be one hell of a story." And as they disappeared into the rainy New York night, two silhouettes moving as one, it was clear that their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Because love, real love, doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. The morning sun poured softly through the tall glass windows of the Manhattan courthouse. Outside, the city roared to life, taxis honking, people rushing, the pulse of New York beating strong and endless. Inside, however, the air carried something quieter, steady, hopeful. Sarah Mitchell adjusted the lapel of her navy blue suit, her reflection staring back at her from the polished marble wall. It had been 3 years since she last stood in this building, 3 years since she'd walked out in disgrace, broken and powerless. But today was different. Today she was coming back not as the accused, but as the advocate. The familiar echo of her heels filled the hallway as she made her way to courtroom 6B. Her new case, a young woman falsely accused of insider trading, mirrored too closely the story she once lived. Perhaps that was why she'd taken it without hesitation. As she entered, the room fell silent for a beat. Lawyers whispered, clerks exchanged looks, some recognizing the woman who had once been the subject of every headline. But Sarah didn't flinch. She walked with quiet confidence, setting her files neatly on the table before taking her seat. Her heart beat steadily, not out of fear, but pride. Outside the courtroom, Ethan Callahan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching her through the glass. His eyes held that same mix of awe and affection he'd carried since the day she walked back into his life. He didn't belong in this world of legal arguments and formalities, but he couldn't stay away. Watching her reclaim the very place that once destroyed her, that was more powerful than any business victory he'd ever known. When Sarah finally stepped out after the hearing, the look on her face said it all. She had won. Ethan smiled as she approached. "How does it feel to be back in your element?" She laughed softly, still catching her breath. "Like breathing for the first time in years." He nodded slowly, his expression tender. "You know, I still think about that night at Bruno's. The night you told me no." Sarah tilted her head, smiling. "The night you offered me $1,000? "Exactly," he said with a chuckle. "That was the night you made me realize something." Her brow arched playfully. "Oh, and what's that?" He met her eyes, the humor fading into sincerity. "That some things can't be bought. Not loyalty, not forgiveness, and definitely not love." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the hum of the city fading behind them. The weight of everything they'd survived seemed to melt away. What was left between them wasn't the remnants of a scandal or the shadow of their pasts. It was truth. Simple, unshakable truth. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm that felt beautifully ordinary. Ethan continued rebuilding Callahan Tech, transforming it into a company driven by ethics and purpose rather than power. He spent less time in boardrooms and more in community projects, launching scholarships for young innovators who couldn't afford an education. Sarah, meanwhile, devoted herself to her small law office. She became known as the lawyer who never turned away a client who'd been wronged. People whispered her name not with pity anymore, but with respect. Every evening they'd meet at Bruno's Bistro, the cafe that had witnessed the strange beginning of their love story. It became their place. The owner, Bruno himself, often joked, "You two turned my coffee shop into a legend." Sarah would laugh, and Ethan would reply, "It all started with bad coffee and worse timing." But deep down, they both knew it started with something far more profound. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled gently in the distance, Ethan sat across from her, watching the candlelight flicker in her eyes. "You ever think about how different life would be?" he said quietly. "If you'd said yes that first night?" Sarah smiled, stirring her tea. "We probably would have hated each other." He grinned. "Maybe, but I would have fallen for you anyway." She looked up, her eyes soft. "And I would have learned that sometimes the best kind of love starts when you stop pretending." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Then let's keep it real, for the rest of our lives." She squeezed his hand gently. "Deal." Outside, the rain continued to fall, tapping softly against the glass, just like the night they met. Sometimes love doesn't come with grand gestures or perfect timing. It comes quietly, disguised as something you never saw coming, maybe even a lie, a deal, or a mistake. But when it's real, it finds you anyway. The camera lingers on Sarah's smile, the rain reflecting against the window, Ethan's hand resting over hers. "Because sometimes," the voice continues, "true love begins with a fake proposal and ends with something no money could ever buy." A pause. Soft piano music swells in the background. And maybe that's the point. That dignity, integrity, and courage to walk away from what's wrong. Those are the things that make us worthy of the love we've always wanted. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, leave a comment and follow this channel to hear more stories that remind us. Love is never perfect, but it's always worth fighting for. Fade out on the words, "Pretend to be my wife for 1,000?" said the CEO. The shy waitress's answer left him speechless. The rain fades, the light softens, and the story ends. Not with an ending, but a promise. If you've stayed with us until now, thank you truly. Thank you for listening to this story of pain, redemption, and love reborn. Every listen, every comment, every heart you leave here gives us the strength to keep telling stories that heal. Stories that remind us that everyone deserves a second chance. Tell us in the comments, do you believe in second chances? Do you believe that love can begin from the most unexpected places? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. And make sure to subscribe, so you won't miss the next story where love, loss, and courage intertwine once again. And if you're going through a hard time right now, remember this. Love, the real kind, may not come when you expect it, but it always finds its way to those who haven't given up on hope.